be yourself. Just be authentic. Find your true self. These words follow you everywhere. They're on Instagram. They're in work meetings. They're in your head when you make choices. But what if trying to be authentic isn't setting you free? What if it's actually a new kind of prison? Think about it. The more you try to be your true self, the more you worry about it. You carefully pick what to post online. You worry if people see the real you. You judge others when they don't seem real enough. What's really scary is how this affects your feelings. When you don't feel authentic, when your feelings don't match what you think they should be, you don't just feel sad. You feel fake, like you're lying to everyone. But here's the big question. What if there isn't just one real you? What if that idea is impossible and sets you up to always feel like you're failing? Imagine if you stopped trying to find your authentic self. What if you accepted that you're different in different situations? What if you have many sides, not just one true self? How would that change how you feel about yourself? In this video, we'll explore why this quest for authenticity started, how it messes with our minds, and the hidden power games behind it. Most importantly, we'll discover what lies beyond this authenticity trap, a better, more honest way to be yourself and connect with others. But first, to understand our modern authenticity crisis, we need to look at how one important thinker changed how we see ourselves and accidentally helped create the very trap we're now stuck in. Jean-Jacques Rousseau didn't mean to create a prison when, back in the 1700s, he said, "To be yourself in a world that is always trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." He was one of the first thinkers to push the idea of being authentic. He believed that society and its rules corrupted people's natural goodness. His answer was simple: strip away social rules and return to your natural true self. What Rousseau couldn't have known was how his freeing idea would turn into the mental prison many of us live in today. His core belief that underneath social pressure lies a true self waiting to come out sounds liberating. But this idea has changed into something Rousseau wouldn't recognize: a commercialized, anxiety-causing demand that controls our culture. To really get this change, we need to understand what Rousseau was fighting against. In his time, who you were was mostly decided by your place in society and strict social ranks. Your role in society, not your feelings or likes, defined who you were. The very idea that you should find yourself or express your true nature would have seemed nonsensical to most people throughout history. Rousseau's big idea was that civilization itself had corrupted our authentic nature. In his famous work, Confessions, he tried something new, an honest self-examination that showed his flaws alongside his good points. This wasn't just a new kind of writing. It changed how humans understood themselves. For the first time, being authentic was seen as a moral virtue, maybe the highest one. The funny thing is, Rousseau's own display of authenticity was carefully crafted. Even as he preached radical honesty, he was creating a persona, a version of authentic Rousseau for the public. This contradiction at the very foundation of our authenticity culture shows its basic problem. The moment we try to perform authenticity, we've already undermined it. But Rousseau's ideas didn't immediately create our modern authenticity crisis. They needed another key historical development: the rise of consumer capitalism. As traditional identity markers like religion, community, and profession weakened throughout the 1900s, consumer culture cleverly took over the language of authenticity. Suddenly, authenticity wasn't just a philosophical ideal, it became something you could buy. Express your true self became not just a moral command, but a marketing slogan. Brands didn't just sell products, they sold authenticity itself. From Apple's Think Different campaign to countless ads promising self-discovery through buying stuff, capitalism turned Rousseau's rebellion into a profitable business. This commercial change of authenticity created a troubling contradiction. We're told to discover our real selves, independent of social influence, while being bombarded with carefully tested images of what authentic living supposedly looks like. The result? We anxiously perform authenticity while suspecting we're failing at it, and judging others by the same impossible standard. But the most troubling part of our authenticity culture remains unexplored. What if the whole idea is psychologically wrong? What if the consistent, unified, authentic self we're told to discover doesn't actually exist in the way we imagine it? What would it mean for our mental health, our relationships, and our society if our basic understanding of identity is based on a fiction? To answer these questions, we need to look at what modern psychological research tells us about the nature of the self, and the findings may completely challenge everything you believe about who you really are. The uncomfortable truth that psychology reveals about the authentic self is both freeing and unsettling. There is no single, consistent, real you waiting to be discovered. The self is not a fixed thing, but a changing contextual process, a collection of sometimes contradictory aspects that shift depending on relationships, environments, and circumstances. Think about this experiment by social psychologist William Swan. When people in the study were asked to describe themselves, their self-descriptions changed dramatically depending on which relationships they were thinking about. The authentic self they showed with family was very different from their self with friends, romantic partners, or colleagues. Were they being fake in some situations and real in others? Or does authenticity itself look different across different relationships? This research challenges the very foundation of our authenticity culture. When you anxiously wonder, am I being my real self right now? You're assuming there's a single true version of you that should consistently show up across all situations. But what if that assumption itself is the problem? Brain science makes this even more complicated by showing that much of what we consider our authentic preferences and natural inclinations are heavily influenced by unconscious processes we aren't aware of. When brain scans show that decisions start in our neural circuitry before we're consciously aware of making them, what does this say about the authenticity of our choices? How can you authentically express a self that is partly built by processes you cannot access or control? This leads us to a troubling question. If our authentic self isn't a stable entity waiting to be discovered, why does the search for it cause so much pain? Why do we feel such deep anxiety when we suspect we're being inauthentic? The answer lies in understanding how the tyranny of authenticity works psychologically. When authenticity becomes a moral imperative, we don't just fear being fake, we fear being fundamentally broken as human beings. The inability to identify or express your true self isn't seen as a natural limitation of human psychology, but as a personal failure. This creates a painful paradox. The more intensely you pursue authenticity, the more self-conscious and performance-oriented you become, and the less authentic you feel. Think about the modern phenomenon of imposter syndrome, that persistent feeling that you're fraudulent despite external evidence of your competence. This isn't simply professional insecurity, it's a symptom of authenticity culture gone toxic. When we believe we must always align our internal feelings with our external performance to be authentic, any gap between the two becomes evidence of our supposed fraudulence. But what if we've misunderstood what authenticity actually means? What if true authenticity isn't about discovering and expressing a fixed, authentic self, but about honestly acknowledging the multiplicity within us? The philosopher Maria Lugones offers a freeing alternative through her concept of world traveling. Rather than seeing our different selves across contexts as evidence of inauthenticity, she suggests we all naturally travel between social worlds, each requiring different aspects of ourselves. The person who can acknowledge and integrate these multiple ways of being isn't inauthentic. They're more deeply authentic about the complex nature of human existence. This changes how we understand relationships. Consider how authenticity talk impacts romantic connections with its demand that we find someone who loves us for who we really are. This assumes, first, that there is a singular, real you, and second, that a partner should equally love all aspects of this supposedly unified self. But what if healthier relationships involve partners who bring out different versions of each other? Who creates spaces for different aspects of our multiplicity to thrive? The political implications of authenticity culture are equally big. Our obsession with personal authenticity has coincided with a retreat from collective action and structural analysis. When self-expression becomes the highest value, systemic critique often takes a back seat. Living your truth individually offers little challenge to the larger systems shaping our lives. In fact, it can hide how economic and social structures limit authentic living for most people. Think about how authenticity talk shows up differently across social classes. For the privileged, authenticity often means pursuing your passions, regardless of practical concerns. Follow your bliss and do what you love. Assume economic security that makes such choices possible. Meanwhile, those struggling financially face a different authenticity bind. They're expected to display passionate authenticity about jobs they may have taken out of necessity rather than choice. This reveals perhaps the most insidious aspect of authenticity culture. It presents itself as universally liberating while reinforcing existing power structures. When we judge people for failing to be authentic, we're often really judging them for failing to perform authenticity in ways that align with dominant cultural values. But the most profound revelation about authenticity may be this: what if the pressure to be authentic is itself inauthentic? What if the most honest approach to selfhood acknowledges that we are all, in some sense, performing? Not because we're fake, but because performance is an inescapable element of human social existence. This brings us to the crucial question that remains unanswered. If the authentic self, as we've understood it, is partly a fiction, what alternative understanding might free us from authenticity's tyranny, while still allowing for meaningful self-development and genuine connection with others? Let me ask you directly, how much of your worry, your self-doubt, your tiredness comes from this constant pressure to be authentic? How many times have you questioned whether your feelings, your job choices, your relationships reflect your real self? How often have you judged others, maybe silently, maybe out loud, for seeming fake? Think about the last time you felt like an imposter. Maybe it was during a job interview, when you confidently talked about your strengths while downplaying your doubts. Maybe it was on social media, when you posted a carefully chosen picture that showed your life at its best. Or maybe it was in a relationship, when you didn't share a difficult feeling because the timing wasn't right. In each of these moments, authenticity culture would have you believe you failed some essential moral test. But what if these supposed failures are actually inevitable parts of being human in a social world? What if the guilt you feel about these moments isn't a sign that you're fake, but evidence of how deeply you've internalized an impossible standard? Consider how authenticity hurts your relationships. How many connections have ended because someone wasn't being true to themselves in the relationship? How many potentially meaningful bonds never formed because they didn't immediately feel authentic? The cruel irony is that by making authenticity our relationship standard, we often reject the very spaces where different aspects of ourselves might grow and flourish. Your work life likely bears similar scars from authenticity culture. Maybe you've questioned whether your work is aligned with your true purpose. Maybe you've felt guilty for not being passionate about your job every day. Or maybe You've seen the unbearable pressure placed on service workers to display authentic enthusiasm, regardless of their actual feelings or working conditions. But the most painful impact may be on your relationship with yourself. When you can't identify a clear, consistent, authentic self, you don't just question your choices, you question your very existence. This creates a profound form of alienation that authenticity culture cannot heal, because it's authenticity culture itself that creates this wound. I'm not suggesting we embrace being fake as the alternative. That would simply reinforce the false binary between authentic and inauthentic that creates this problem in the first place. Instead, I'm inviting you to consider a more nuanced understanding of human identity, one that might actually deliver the psychological freedom that authenticity culture falsely promises. What would it mean to embrace your multiplicity, to recognize that different aspects of yourself emerge in different contexts, not because you're being fake, but because you're being human? What if authenticity isn't about finding and expressing a single, true self, but about honestly acknowledging the complexity of who you are across different relationships and environments? This shift doesn't mean giving up self-reflection or personal growth. Rather, it means approaching self-development with more compassion and less rigid expectation. Instead of asking, "Is this my authentic self?" we might ask, "Is this aspect of myself one I want to nurture? Does it contribute to a life I find meaningful? Does it foster connections that enrich my experience?" This approach transforms how we view our contradictions. When you feel conflicting desires or hold seemingly incompatible values, authenticity culture would have you believe something's wrong, that one must be your true feeling and the others somehow fake. But what if these contradictions aren't evidence of inauthenticity, but of your humanity? What if embracing these contradictions is more honest than forcing yourself into artificial consistency? Think about how this shift might free you from the exhausting performance of authenticity. When you no longer need to maintain a coherent narrative about your true self, you can engage more openly with life's complexities. You can acknowledge that you're different with different people, not because you're being fake, but because relationships naturally evoke different aspects of who you are. But this freedom comes with responsibility. If we abandon the simplistic, authentic, inauthentic binary, we need new ways to make ethical choices, without the false clarity of just be your authentic self. We must develop more nuanced approaches to deciding who we want to be and how we want to live. This isn't about abandoning truthfulness or integrity. Rather, it's about recognizing that human truth is messier and more contextual than authenticity culture acknowledges. It's about being honest about our complexity instead of pretending we're simpler than we are. I believe you already know this intuitively. In your most honest moments, haven't you recognized that you contain multitudes? Haven't you felt how different environments bring out different aspects of yourself that all feel genuine in their context? Haven't you sensed that your most meaningful growth often happens not when you find yourself, but when you expand beyond what you thought yourself to be? The freedom I'm describing isn't theoretical. It's immediately available once you recognize the fiction at the heart of authenticity culture. But to fully embrace this alternative, we need to address one final question. What practical approach to living emerges when we move beyond the tyranny of authenticity? What replaces the quest for the authentic self? The path beyond authenticity's tyranny isn't about giving up the search for meaning or truthfulness. It's about embracing a more sophisticated understanding of human identity, what philosophers call narrative identity. Rather than seeking a static, authentic self, we can recognize that we are dynamic stories unfolding over time, integrating our many sides into meaningful narratives that we continually revise. Psychologist Dan McAdams has spent decades studying how people construct life stories that give meaning to their experiences. His research shows that mental well-being isn't linked to finding an authentic self, but with developing a flexible, coherent narrative that can integrate both consistency and change, both unity and multiplicity. This narrative approach offers practical guidelines for living beyond authenticity's tyranny. First, embrace your multiplicity. Rather than seeing your different aspects as evidence of being fake, recognize them as resources that help you respond to life's varied contexts. The part of you that thrives in professional settings isn't more or less you than the part that emerges among close friends or when you're alone. Second, shift from discovery to creation. Instead of trying to uncover a pre-existing authentic self, acknowledge your active role in creating who you are through your choices and commitments. This doesn't mean identity is random. It's limited by your history, biology, and social context. But it is something you help shape rather than merely discover. Third, practice integrity without rigidity. Integrity doesn't require being the same in all contexts. It means thoughtfully integrating your different aspects into a meaningful whole. It means making commitments that provide continuity across contexts without denying the legitimate differences each context brings out. Fourth, develop discernment about performance. All social life involves performance, but not all performance is equally valuable. The question isn't whether you're performing, but whether your performances contribute to meaningful connections and a life you find worthwhile. Some performances feel draining because they contradict your values or abilities. Others feel energizing because they align with your broader narrative. Fifth, shift from self-focus to engagement. Ironically, our preoccupation with authenticity often traps us in self-conscious overthinking that prevents genuine immersion in experience. By focusing less on whether you're being authentic and more on meaningful engagement with people and activities, you often naturally express aspects of yourself without the paralyzing self-monitoring that authenticity culture encourages. This approach doesn't eliminate the challenges of modern identity. It doesn't provide the false comfort of believing there's a single, real you waiting to be discovered. But it offers something more valuable: the freedom to acknowledge your complexity without shame, and the tools to shape an identity that feels meaningful without the burden of authenticity's impossible demands. The philosopher Charles Taylor suggests that authenticity, properly understood, isn't about uncovering a pre-existing self, but about creative fidelity to the sources of meaning in your life. It's about articulating what matters to you and living in ways that honor those meanings. This richer understanding transforms authenticity from a psychological prison to a genuine ethical orientation. If this exploration has resonated with you, if you've recognized your own struggles in authenticity culture's contradictions, I invite you to share your experience. If you've felt the weight of trying to identify and express a consistent, true self, comment below with "I contain multitudes" to join the conversation about moving beyond authenticity's tyranny toward a more honest and freeing understanding of identity. The tyranny of authenticity stays powerful, mostly because we lack words for alternatives. When the only options seem to be authentic or fake, we naturally choose the first one, despite its impossible demands. But as we've explored today, human identity is far richer and more complex than this simple either-or allows. By embracing your many sides, shifting from discovery to creation, practicing flexible integrity, developing discernment about performance, and focusing on engagement rather than self-monitoring, you can begin to free yourself from authenticity's impossible standards while still living truthfully and meaningfully. This isn't just a philosophical shift. It has immediate practical benefits. Relationships deepen when we no longer expect others to love a fictional, whole, authentic self, but instead appreciate how different connections bring out different aspects of who we are. Work becomes less stressful when we recognize that our professional roles aren't separate from our real selves, but are spaces where particular capabilities and aspects of ourselves develop and express. Even time alone transforms when it's no longer burdened with the pressure to find yourself, and instead becomes a space for reflection on the continuing story you're living. The journey beyond authenticity's tyranny is both personal and collective. As more of us recognize the fiction at the heart of authenticity culture and embrace more nuanced understandings of identity, we create social spaces where others can do the same. We build communities that honor complexity rather than demanding performance of simplistic authenticity. This exploration is just the beginning. In future videos, we'll examine how authenticity talk functions in specific areas, from relationships to work to political engagement, and develop practical tools for navigating identity in ways that foster genuine connection and meaningful living without authenticity's burdens. If you've found value in this perspective, if you've recognized your own struggles in what we've explored today, subscribe now to join this ongoing investigation. Each video builds on our previous conversations, developing a richer vocabulary and more nuanced understanding of what it means to live truthfully in a complex world. By subscribing, you're not just supporting this channel, you're joining a community of people committed to moving beyond simplistic cultural narratives toward more honest, compassionate, and freeing ways of understanding ourselves and others. I'll see you in the next exploration, where we'll dive deeper into what lies beyond authenticity's tyranny.